I'm going to give you 5 things that you should be considering if you are 5 years or so from retirement. So the first up is knowing your expenses. This is not so that people like me, a financial planner, can tell you to skip dessert or stop going to get coffee. That's not the point of this. What I'm talking about is knowing what your baseline expenses are. What do we need to keep you LIVIN, baby? Okay, what do we need to at least replace? Most people, when they're considering retiring, they want to, at the very minimum, maintain the standard of living they have today. What do we need to replace that standard of living? What are your expenses today? So this is going to take some homework on your part to figure this out because your expenses have probably changed over the last 5 or 10 years, especially if you have a family that you were or are still currently supporting, even though they might be college students or teenagers. They are still baked into what you're spending today, but they won't be when you retire. If that's the case for you, or if it's not, it doesn't matter. Your expenses have changed. All of our expenses have changed through just mere inflation. So whatever you were paying for something 5 years ago is surely not the price today. Now, that's a worthwhile exercise in doing just because you want to understand what is my monthly household expense that I have to continue to cover. So working with the financial planner, we can identify the expenses that will be there and won't be there. For example, a mortgage that will be paid off maybe mid-retirement. So what I would do is, of course, we're going to get that information about what does it cost to run your household, including all the debt that might be paid off at different points throughout your retirement. What is the ongoing expense going to be like? We want to establish a baseline of what it's going to cost to keep you alive, fed, with the lights on, that kind of thing. Okay. That leads me to item number 2, which is visualizing a good, better, and best version of retirement. We want to do some iterations here because we don't know what the future is going to hold for any of us. So what we're doing now is making some good, educated guesses about market returns and preparing for a host of scenarios. If you know what your expenses are, it makes it easier to figure out if my portfolio generates blank return and that translates to my good scenario. Great. I know what to do because it'll probably look just like what my life looks like today, where I'm spending roughly the same amount. If it turns out that your portfolio is better than that, or if we've established that probably not going to run out of money and there might be some money left over and your goal is to pass that on as tax efficiently as possible to the people or charities you care most about, that might be our good scenario where we don't run out of money. And if there's something left, great, we'll pass it on to the people or causes we care about. If we've hit that threshold and it still looks because of market returns that, yeah, I'm going to have even more than I thought. Let's go back to the drawing board and come up with a better vision of retirement. What does the next iteration look like where perhaps there's more to spend, more to give, if that's important to you? Does that look like a certain kind of travel? Does it involve maybe snowbirding in Florida? Does it involve maybe a second home? Just try to do a little dreaming here. Once we've established that you're not going to run out of money, what else is possible? Next up on the list would be the best scenario. Would you like to fund a grandchild's education or multiple grandchildren, for example? Would you like to do some volunteering of some kind? Now, notice that's not about money. So not all of this is about money, this good, better, and best visualization. The vision of retirement that would make you happy, that's a good scenario. And then stack your dreams on top of that for our better and best scenarios. So on top of that, it's really important to know what you're going to retire to. I ask people all the time, if I call you up on a Tuesday afternoon, if you've just retired and it's 11:38 a.m. on a random Tuesday, what do you think I might find you doing? What do you think you'll say you're up to? You need to have a good answer for that question. And it's probably not something that's going to come to you when you're asked about it for the first time. It's going to take some thinking to really put that together. And it's going to evolve and probably crystallize over time. So this is just another great reason why you might want to start planning for retirement well in advance of actually retiring. 5 years plus would be a good starting point for us to start working together or for us to start planning your retirement. Next up, number 3 is know what risks you don't want to tangle with? What risks do you want to take off of the table when it comes to retirement? Are you afraid of living too long? But we need to have a plan for longer than expected longevity. What will happen if you're still here at 98 and we only planned for you to be here at 85? I bet you still get hungry at 98. I bet you still want the lights to turn on. Who's taking care of you at that point? Where are you living? What do your expenses look like? So we need to have a plan to address the risk of longer than expected lifespans. For men who are 65 these days, you can still be expected to live to about 82. For women, if you're 65, you can be expected to live till about 85. So we need to plan for at least 17 years of retirement, and more than that if you're a couple. Chances are pretty high that one of you will make it past 85. We need to be prepared for that. Is that a risk you're willing to dance with? If you feel like dancing with that risk, there's solutions or ways to address that in our planning. Do you want to be prepared for expected expenses? This could look like long-term care expenses. This could look like expenses to take care of a loved one. This could look like expenses to maintain a home that you weren't anticipating. Perhaps you're familiar, if you're on the East Coast anyway, with the stucco that was put on a lot of homes. Well, turns out a stucco may not actually be a great fit for homes in the East Coast because of mold that gets behind the stucco, and it can be very costly to remediate, often to the tune of several $100,000, depending on the size of the home. So is that something that anybody thought was going to happen when they bought that house? Probably not. But it was something that they needed to address, a spending shock, if you will. That's the kind of thing that's really hard to predict. If I got an unexpected $30, $50, $100,000 bill for something, where would that money come from? And what would that translate to as far as I need to reduce what I can spend now because I have $100,000 in my portfolio that's working for me? Or will I have been far enough along in my retirement that actually it turns out $100,000 withdrawal right now at 79 probably isn't going to be that big of a deal because, to be rather blunt about it, there may not be that much time left on the clock for you. Bad markets, how will you tolerate that? Is that a risk that you want to leave on the table? There are ways to address that through planning, not only with the kinds of investments we pick, but also how we generate income for you. Think and reflect on the differences between how you invest as you're accumulating assets to how you invest when you are distributing them as somebody who's no longer employed and taking income from your portfolio to complement whatever you might be getting from Social Security, pensions, and other investments. There's a couple of examples of risks that are on the table for all people that are considering retiring. So let's talk about which ones you're willing to tolerate and which ones you'd like to find a solution for. Know what risks you can take and which ones you just flat out will not. You also, number 4, want to make sure that you diversify well before you are getting ready to retire. Ideally, you're a diversified investor all along. So this is going to help offset any big declines like we're experiencing right now as markets are digesting tariff-related news. People who have bonds in their portfolio are probably happier than the folks who are really heavily tilted towards stocks. So the bonds they're carrying their water. They're doing their job by offering stability and emotional or psychological relief to say, oh, something's not down. Okay. So understanding that diversification is your friend. It's not there so that every single part of your portfolio can make money. Instead, what it's there to do is offer some comfort, some solace in that you're not so invested in one kind of asset that it can tank your retirement. This is especially important. I really want to emphasize number 4 here because diversification is not just for the sake of avoiding putting all your eggs in one or too few baskets. What it's really meant to do is to help your portfolio avoid big catastrophic losses that are especially relevant to people who are coming up on or just recently retired. So we could consider this timeline of plus or minus 5 years from your retirement date. So 5 years before you retire, 5 years after you retire, roughly, where the returns that you get as an investor have a magnified importance. Because let's use some simple math. Let's say you have $1 million portfolio and you lose 10%. If you lose 10% of $1 million, you lost $100,000. That means you now have $900,000. Just for you to get back up to your $1 million, you don't need 10%. You need 11.11%. If you lose 10% and make 10% back, you're not back to a million. You're only back to $990,000. So you need 11.11% to return you back to $1 million. If you lose 20%, you've lost $200,000. Now you're down to 800 grand. You need 25% to push you back up to $1 million. 25% rate of return on $800,000 would be an additional $200,000 to give you that $1 million back. Where this gets really dangerous for retirees is if you experience that loss, that 10%, 20% decline, and then you have to take money out to fund your lifestyle, that is just digging that hole a little bit deeper for your portfolio to have to dig itself out of, with what's going to be now an even bigger rate of return to get you back to that high water mark. You may not need to actually return to that high water mark. You don't need to maintain $1 million principal throughout retirement. Probably. You may need to actually come around to the idea that some money, some principal amount, is okay to spend down. That's where working with a financial planner, you can work on that. One of the biggest problems that I see as people shift from somebody who's accumulating and building assets to somebody who's retired and taking money out of their portfolio is that fear that they don't have enough and they don't want to see their portfolio go below a certain threshold, when in fact, that's what we need in order to fund their lifestyle. So you may have to do some work to get comfortable with the idea that you're spending from principal, but we don't want the portfolio and the returns that you get to do that for you, where you've gotten a market decline and it's taken money from your portfolio temporarily if you don't sell, but then you are forced to sell to generate the income that you need to pay your bills. So that's something that's called sequence of return risk, where the timing of that is important, because if you get a bad market return when you're in your 40s, no big deal. I'm still probably relatively well employed. You can still take advantage of it because you're putting money into your retirement plan at work, or you're saving. Outside of that, you're buying assets with dollars that are going to go a little further when you're buying stuff that's been put on sale. That's what a market decline really amounts to, especially when you're in the accumulation phase or still not yet retired. Once you're retired, though, that game really changes and that calculus changes. So let's say you're in your 60s and 70s, those kinds of bad market returns can be really damning to your retirement, and the likelihood of you running out of money too soon is heightened because of that. We need to protect those very precious years just before and just after retirement. Your investment strategy should reflect the danger that you'll have to navigate during those years. If you get a bad market return when you're 89 and most of your life and withdrawals are behind you, it may not be the end of your retirement plan if you got that bad return in that first year that you retired. We have to also recognize the difference between investing before retirement and investing afterwards. So number 5 on the list is making a plan for taxes. You will have to pay taxes on a variety of your sources of income. Your Social Security may be taxable, probably is going to be taxable. Your retirement accounts, if they are not a Roth, you'll pay taxes on your pre-tax retirement accounts. And your pension, your investments, rental property income, if you have that. So you're going to have taxable income. Now, just because you have taxable income doesn't mean that it is what it is. There's strategy to this, and strategy to minimizing the taxation and paying what you're legally required to pay. But it's very possible that you may be able to save substantial, potentially 6-figure sums of taxes by being strategic about when you pay the taxes. This can often take the form of taking distributions from retirement accounts that are taxable earlier than you had planned to or before you're required to, paying the taxes on it at a tax rate that is more favorable than if you waited until your 70s and you had to start taking required minimum distributions. The process of taking distributions out through Roth conversions can help lower your lifetime tax bill. Qualified charitable distributions Delaying Social Security can feed into the Roth conversion strategy, capital gains harvesting, tax loss harvesting, premium tax credits if you're retiring on the earlier side before 65. There's a way probably for you to minimize the amount of taxes that you will pay over the rest of your life with the assets that you have or will have at retirement. That is really just a matter of looking out into the future and understanding how the various amounts and sources of your income will be taxed and just saying, when does it make the most sense for us to pay taxes on this? Rather than letting the government dictate that to you by largely age, which is what happens when those required minimum distributions kick in. So if you're interested in exploring these 5 things that you should be doing, you should talk to your local certified financial planner practitioner. If you don't have one, I would be happy to talk to you about what I do to help people get more mileage out of their money and hopefully enjoy a version of your retirement. I'd be happy to walk you through steps 1 through 5 and all of the other things that I do. I work with clients all over. I am located just outside Philadelphia, but happy to have a conversation with people anywhere across the US.